Hello everyone, this is John Mark Johnson Jr. again, host of Relationship and Truth, and today I am broadcasting to you from the great state of Wyoming, and unfortunately the room I'm in is not very well lit. They put their desk in kind of a weird place, and usually they have a lamp on the desk that I can use to light myself. This time that's not the case. Instead I'm using my phone to light up myself, and so the lighting's not all that great. I apologize about that. But hey, it's the joys of living on the road. You never know exactly what you're going to encounter. It just is what it is. That being said, I did want to take a few moments to talk about a topic that is going to become more relevant as time goes on. And that is the topic of using computer analysis in analyzing particularly the Greek New Testament, biblical text in general, but especially the Greek New Testament. Many of you already know that the ECM, what does that stand for? Edito Critica Major, I think is what it is. I'm sorry, some of the names I don't take all the time to memorize, but the abbreviation is ECM. It's the major project that's going on right now in order to analyze the Greek New Testament text and come up with, that much more of an accurate version of our Greek New Testament text. And what worries a lot of people, and frankly including myself, is the fact that it is a method that is largely based on the computer. That is, the different manuscripts are basically put into the computer system, and then the computer analyzes all those Greek manuscripts and tries to come up with basically a genealogy for all the different texts that are represented, and so that it can go back to the beginning. The problem, though, that most people have already noted is that using a computer analysis when it comes to textual criticism tends to introduce a lot more ambiguity than it does certainty. And you can look at just the most recent edition of, say, the United Bible Society's text, for example. The United Bible Society's 5th edition, which came out, what was that, back in 2014, just a few years ago, it took some of its material from the ECM. And in particular, it took its material on the Catholic epistles, which start at James and then end at Jude. It took that material from the ECM, and it actually introduced a lot of uncertainty. That is, in the UBS 5th edition, they started using the symbol. As far as I know, it was new to that edition. I haven't seen it in any previous material so far. But they started using this little symbol that's a little diamond that shows that two variants were basically equal in the sight of the textual analysis. They couldn't decide between these two. And you look in the back of United Bible Society's 5th edition at all of the places where this diamond appears that doesn't appear in the notes, and every single one of the unfootnoted appearances is in the Catholic epistles where they drew from the ECM. Whereas in previous editions, as far as I know, you didn't have that problem. And that just has to go back to computer analysis in general. Computer analysis, when it comes to literary criticism in general, tends to be very, very vague. And I'm not aware of any case where a computer analysis of any given text, let alone the New Testament, but of any given text, proved to be definitive. And the problem is that well, actually, there's lots of problems that are involved. One of the biggest ones is that the people who are putting together these analyses usually do them on a very theoretical basis that has yet to be proven in reality. In the case of the ECM, they're using what is called the Coherence-Based Genealogical method. And for those of you who follow Dr. James White on the web, he's talked about it, he's studying it in detail, and of course, he hasn't had time to go over everything with everyone, but there are books and material that are available, that are out there, that talk about the coherence-based genealogical method. And the problem, of course, is that, what's a good way to put it? these things are made by people who typically are an expert in one area who are trying to borrow from another. That's kind of the polite way of putting it. But when you're doing this kind of analysis, you have to recognize that, you know, there's a mathematics side to it, because that's basically how a computer runs, is off of mathematics. And you have to understand the limitations of mathematics and what kinds of assumptions go into computer algorithms and go into math in general, in order to make good heads or tails of anything that's out there. Unfortunately, though, a lot of people who are literary critics don't really understand math all that well. And the people who understand math fairly well usually are not literary critics. And so the two don't usually mesh all that well. I'm actually kind of a weird person in that I actually have degrees both in math and in English, literary criticism in general. More specifically was kind of my area of emphasis. Not that I have any super great degree or anything like that. It's still just bachelor's degrees. But I still did wind up double majoring in that kind of thing, and I have both of those emphases and both of those certifications. Well, had them as long as I kept them current. I'm no longer teaching, so I don't keep them current. But at the time, I did. And so I get to see both sides of it. I know what goes on in the math realm, and I also know what goes on in the literary field. And the two usually are not made to be compatible with each other. And one way that it usually shows with computer algorithms is that when you put them up against real data, they almost always fail. And there's been tests that have been done in the past. This isn't the first time that a group has tried to come up with basically a computer analysis of a text and to prove something one way or the other. The problem, though, is that they fail when it comes down to actually testing it out and to actually trying to prove things definitively that way. And as far as the coherence-based genealogical method in particular is concerned, I'm not aware of any tests that they've done to actually show that it has any real veracity. That is, what you'd want to do is you'd want to take an original text, have people copy it through successive generations, have the different copyists copy it with certain tendencies down through those generations, have the generations mix and match and those kinds of things on down the line, and then take a sampling of those different generations that have been mixed and matched along the way, and then from a sampling that gets proportionally smaller as you go back to the beginning, see if the computer system can actually give you the original text. And if it can't, well, then that's going to be a problem. As far as I know, the folks over at ECM haven't bothered to do this. They actually haven't tested the system. It is a completely untested algorithm as far as I know, as far as being able to show it in reality actually working. And then also taking other texts that are fairly well known and running them through computer analysis and those kinds of things. As far as I know, it hasn't been done. Now, there is some work that has been published on the coherence-based genealogical method, and I actually do have the book in my library, but I haven't read it yet. So it's possible that maybe someone did decide to go through and verify it. If they verified it, great. But as far as I know, it hasn't been verified. It is still basically a hypothetical. And hypothetical reconstruction theories that have not been tested are almost always going to be problematic, and like it showed in the Catholic epistles, they almost always introduce more ambiguity than was there originally. Like I said, as far as I know, the United Bible Society's version of the Greek New Testament did not have that level of ambiguity before they started referencing with the ECM. You won't see all those little diamond notes at the back where they list all the unregistered variants, and every single one was from the Catholic epistles where they borrowed from the ECM. These are variants that we couldn't choose between because the computer wasn't able to come to a decision, basically. When it comes to a lot of things, you know, computers are great, but when it comes to this area, especially where the algorithm, as far as I know, is still actually untested, doing things by hand by a human being is still going to be superior. And when it comes to textual criticism, the normal eclectic earliest and best methodology actually has been tested several times, and every single time it comes out to be a very, very reliable method of reconstructing a text. For example, Dr. Daniel Wallace in his classes on textual criticism will usually start out his class, at least at a fairly early point in the course, by giving his students a text to copy, and they put it through several generations of copies and have the people mix and match and those kinds of things, and then they take a sampling of those at the end after they've learned all the text critical techniques, and they're asked to reconstruct the original text, and they always manage to reconstruct it to within one word of the original, and that one word turns out to be not important for the overall meaning. It has to do, I think it is, with either a particular conjunction or a particular preposition, that if you happen to change it out for another one that's close to it, it doesn't vastly change anything. So you're talking about a less than 1% margin of error with doing it manually. But of course, until we actually do a real test on the coherence-based genealogical method, we're not going to know what the margin of error is. And so it really, really bothers me that the ECM is being incorporated into the United Bible Society's text, into the Nestle Aland text and things like that. It's not going to end well. I do not trust a computer algorithm that is untested. Okay, now eventually could they produce a computer algorithm that really could do a good job? Maybe. But when it comes to textual analysis, a computer lacks something that a human investigator has, and that is human intuition. Computers tend to apply rules rather blindly, and they do not have a good sense of context. Unlike humans, humans are built for language. They are built for analyzing languages and those kinds of things. We are communicative creatures with language built into us. And so it's not at all different, or it's not foreign to who we are to do this kind of analysis. It's a part of who we are. And it's going to be much more successful given that we're actually made for that. A computer system, though, isn't. It's made to crunch numbers, and it basically makes decisions on the basis of numbers. It doesn't have an intuitive feel for language. And until computer programs vastly improve in that regard, the ECM is going to produce more ambiguity than it is going to certainty. We've already seen it with the Catholic epistles in the UBS text, the United Bible Society's text, and I do not anticipating it being any different for other portions of the Greek New Testament. We're going to see a lot more diamonds in our textual apparatus, in the textual apparatus of whatever edition happens to be put out because of that. Now I know, if you guys happen to follow James White and whatnot, he happens to be a fairly big fan of it, but even by his own admission, Dr. James White is not someone who is well versed in mathematics, let alone programming theory and those kinds of things. And granted, I'm not a huge, computer programmer, but I do know mathematics. I do know what underlies it all, and I can tell you that math is not where it needs to be for that kind of thing, and certainly not the kind of programming that linguists would have available to them. They're just not that far advanced. Let's face it, linguists are not computer geeks, and computer geeks are generally not linguists. There's certain things that they would have in common in what they do, but generally they're cut from two different cloths, as it were. And you really need people who, well, to a certain extent, are like myself, that are trained equally thoroughly in both areas, doing these kinds of things, and that's just not what you have going on right now. And then, of course, there's also that big issue, like I said, of having it be essentially untested. As far as I know, the coherence-based genealogical method has never been put through any kind of series of rigorous tests whatsoever. Now, like I said, there is a book that's out there on the coherence-based genealogical method. It's in my library. I haven't got around to reading it yet. And if it happens that they actually have done thorough research on this, where they've actually tested it against a known standard and did a control test on it, and preferably multiple control tests on it, well, once I've read it, and if that happens to be the case, I'll, of course, come back and I'll retract it. But as far as I know, that's not the case. And the reason why I'm putting this out there without having read it is because I know the MO when it comes to computer models and linguistics. They usually put out the model before testing it, which is stupid, but that's usually the way it goes. They have this, this fine theory of how everything works, and they don't actually take it and apply it to a real-life scenario, which annoys me to no end. A lot of times linguists who get a hold of a computer system really like to apply theory blindly and don't like to do control tests. It's very, very common. It's happened in the past. People have done, textual analyses of, say, the Pauline corpus. This has been done before, where they proved that the Pauline corpus had like half a dozen different authors. It wasn't all Paul. And then they take that same algorithm and they apply it to a corpus of works from one given author that they know of, and it turns out that that corpus was written by like 14 people, when in fact we know it was the same person. They just don't work. You have to test them first before making the claim. And as far as I know, there hasn't been any thorough testing of the coherence-based genealogical method. That is hugely problematic. And until they go through and do the kind of testing that would be required, you're not going to convince anyone, certainly not me. Okay, the manual method of textual investigation that is usually taught in text critical courses is done manually in person by a person looking at all the available evidence for each textual variant and going through and doing it that way, has been tested many times and proven to be reliable to within a 1% margin of error. That is pretty rock solid. I don't know of any computer model that can beat that. And the problem is that most computer models aren't tested until after the fact. They do an analysis on whatever they were designed to analyze, and then people publish the results, and then people are sitting there looking at them going, that seems a little funky. And then they go back and they test against something else and find out it doesn't work. Are you saying the entire Pauline corpus was written by at least 6 different authors? That sounds a little weird. Let's try it with, say, the James Joyce textual corpus and see if it gives different authors when we know that all of this was written by James Joyce. And oh, look, it does. It does say there's multiple authors when there was only one. That's a problem. And that's the kind of thing that happens. And I know I'm getting a little rambly, but hopefully you get the point. I am very much so concerned about Münsters, and that's the place in Germany that most of our textual critical stuff comes from. I'm very concerned about their reliance on computers at this point. Yeah, it's great to have a computer analysis, but you still need to have, a person driving, and you need to have someone making decisions when the computer can't. If the computer can't make a decision, you don't throw up your hands and say, well, that one's a diamond, I just can't make up my mind. No, you say, okay, the computer can't make a decision, but the human being can. And you go into it and you look at it from that point of view. Right now, the computer-based models that have been applied to the New Testament that have shown up in the major academic works like the United Bible Society's text have introduced more ambiguity than certainty. They're not helping to clear anything up. Instead, these people are taking lots of money and time to make the text less certain than it was before. That's a problem. So for those of you who are out there who are interested in textual criticism, I would highly, 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 highly urge you to contact as many people as you know to ask them to do thorough research and tests on this stuff before publishing results for the Greek New Testament based on this. Hold their feet to the fire on it. And if it's producing more ambiguity than we had to begin with, then that's usually a sign that it's not reliable and it shouldn't be treated as such. Just my thoughts. Take them for what they are, which is the thoughts of a random guy who travels around for work and used to teach math and English. That's all that I am. No one particularly special, but I think there are some points that I have made that are valid, maybe not, And like I said, once I read that book that's on the coherence-based genealogical method, maybe I'll change my tune, in which case I'll be putting out another video. But so far I have never seen an accurate computer analysis of a literary issue. Whenever they get tested against real-world data that we can actually see what the original was and what the various text forms were that developed through copying, those kinds of things, they just don't work. All right, so that is my more than 2 cents worth talking about what is going on with the ECM, the coherence-based genealogical method, and those kinds of things. Thank you for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to a knowledge of the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.